Hello and welcome to Media Snack from London.
And hello from New Jersey.
Hey PJ, how are you today? You good?
I'm good, David. How are you?
Good, thank you. And good to see you again. We've got another big gnarly topic that I want us to cover today, and it's still within the space of kind of media cost accountability and auditing. A few weeks ago, you and I kind of spoke around pool-based auditing, a more traditional and old-fashioned perhaps way of tracking the efficiency of media spend. This week, we're going to go right to the other end of the spectrum, and we're going to talk about whether you can and how should you audit programmatic investment. So media that is being invested through programmatic platforms, mostly on digital. And that's a big kind of question on many advertisers' desks at the moment, as more and more of their money migrates towards programmatic platforms, which has a completely different way of buying, a completely different dynamic to traditional media inventory generally. They're seeing their ability to audit their media spend shrinking. And that naturally kind of worries them. So we're going to discuss that question. We're going to unpick it to see what the dynamics are at play, if and how you can. And then PJ, at the end, you're going to provide some kind of informed perspective and tips for marketeers and media leaders and procurement leaders who are dealing with this issue at present. All on today's Media Snack.
Welcome to Media Snack, the live weekly show where we unpack the important questions that you all have about media, agencies, marketing and more. If you're new to the channel, it's great to have you join us. Subscribe below to get alerts of all upcoming weekly episodes.
So PJ, let's get stuck in. What's the question of the week?
Yes, this is a good one. The question is, can programmatic spend be audited?
Yeah, right. Okay. So I'm going to try and unpick that as best I can. And then I'm going to hand over to you to provide some insight and educated perspective for those media leaders that are kind of, dealing with this kind of issue at the moment. So let's just start a little bit at the top with what is programmatic buying? Essentially, that's just the automation of media buying. It used to be and it still is in some cases, that you would, as an advertiser, or you get your agency to go to the media owner and do a deal based on the amount of money that you were going to be spending on that platform or that channel or that paper or that magazine. And they would provide you with a price. And that would be the price that you would pay for placing that inventory. Fairly straightforward. And your auditor would be responsible for holding the agency often to account for the prices that were made during that deal making process. That was kind of that's the kind of the traditional way of doing it. Now, programmatic is all about automation. So it is about linking the buyer and the seller through automated technologies that enable that deal to be done, in many cases, in real time. Okay, so in most cases, most digital inventory is bought that way now. And as we know, a significant proportion of the media industry is investing their money through digital kind of platforms. But increasingly, and in the future, almost all media is going to be bought through programmatic kind of platforms. Now, that's a challenge. That's a challenge for advertisers, right? Because it's forcing them to think differently about the way that they hold their media investments and their agency partners, if they're still responsible for buying that media, to kind of account. Because in these platforms, most of the media that is transacted is based on an auction base. So it is based on supply and demand. It has absolutely no respect for scale buying. And it is based simply on the amount of money that you are willing to pay for a particular impact or consumer view. Okay, essentially, you're buying media on eBay, right? That's the same dynamic. And as an advertiser, you're seeing more and more money transacted that way, yet you see your ability to audit that media shrinking because perhaps traditional methods of auditing media cost just don't work in that kind of mechanic, right? But I mean, the most obvious one that comes to mind to me is that it's actually within the programmatic space, it's very dangerous to perhaps put a cap on the amount of money that you're willing to pay. That's how traditional auditing works, right? So the price is set. If your agency pays more than that, they're going to be penalized. In a programmatic space, through the auction mechanic, your ability to actually reach that right consumer is based on your desire to pay that amount of money. And if you arbitrarily restrict that, then it could actually damage your ability to kind of reach that consumer. So that's the most obvious one as far as I'm concerned. So if I'm sitting there as a media director, and actually I was talking to a media director yesterday who has 70% of their income, 70% of their media investment being run through programmatic platforms, which means that only 30% is auditable. And so this is obviously a question in their minds. And I'm sure there are many advertisers out there that see an increasing opportunity or an ability to audit their media in this new space. But how do they do it, right? Firstly, can they do it? And how do they do it? So PJ, if I'm that media director, kind of how would you begin to help me ease into that challenge?
Yeah, it's a great challenge, really. Excuse me. When you think about the way to approach that challenge, you have to sort of break down that it's an entirely new way of buying media than the way people have done it in the past. And so when you look at the right auditing techniques that are applied, they have to be unique and they have to be different. So we'll talk about that a little bit. But let's start with some of the statistics that back up the trends that you were talking about, David, because they're kind of phenomenal when you look at them at a very aggregate level. Global digital ad spend grew by 25% in 2021. 25 is a huge single year growth trajectory. Now it looks like it's going to grow by another 14% in 2022. That'll be about $475 billion in total size. The digital part of that is going to make up more than 60% then of global ad spend. So when you start to think about the size and scale of the investment, and then you break it down further and say, okay, how much of that digital spend is going to be transacted programmatically? It's actually forecasted to be over 90% of that entire chunk of change is going to be transacted on a programmatic basis. So phenomenal growth stats. Should you audit programmatic investments? Is sort of the bigger question is how can you afford not to?
Yeah, that's
when
right.
you think about the size and scale of that investment, right? So we think about it from the accountability perspective, and we know that there are some good measures that you can put in place. And we'll talk about a few of those in this episode. But the answer most definitively is yes. Programmatic spend should be audited, and it can be audited. But it has to be audited in a very different way. And you were mentioning this, David, about the way audits have worked in the past in traditional media. When you start to try to audit programmatic, and you try to get, say, for example, a like-for-like comparison, which is what auditors have traditionally done in offline media, it's absolutely impossible to do that in a programmatic environment, right? You can never actually absolutely get at a like-for-like comparison because the dynamics of the marketplace are fluid. You don't know at a given point if that $4 CPM is good or bad.
Yeah.
That $4 CPM today is good. Yesterday, $2 CPM was good. And that depends on who's in the marketplace negotiating against me at any given time, right? So we have to look at it differently. And we have to think about the aspects of programmatic that influence the audit. So price, quality, outcomes of the campaign, all still very important. But if you audit any one of those measures, you kind of and you eliminate the others, you present a lot of risk to the brands themselves. It can compromise, what's strategically right for those brands. And you mentioned the obvious one where somebody sets a ceiling on the price. Fair enough that you would set a ceiling on the budget. An advertiser has to know, look, I'm going to spend this amount of money. That's what I have in budget. But I'm not going to set a price per component on that because I need you, the buyer, to be nimble enough in the marketplace to be able to reflect the dynamics of the marketplace, right? So you need to get the best inventory possible in that particular negotiation framework. So a couple of things to think about for advertisers. First, in programmatic, it's outcomes based, right? That's what you need to be really laser-like paying attention to. You have to understand the link between price, quality, and outcomes. That linkage is super important, and it gives you some guardrails. And then it gives you a baseline to work from. So you have that set up in the beginning, but then you got to constantly refine that because as more information comes through the pipes, there's more opportunity to analyze that data, more opportunities to optimize that campaign delivery. So that's the first. The second is defining thresholds. So programmatic buying, we all know this, has inherent risks, right? So brand safety, poor viewability, fraud, these are all the ones that pop up to the top of your mind and are in the headlines of everything we read in our trades.
Yeah.
So it's important to create some preset thresholds by campaign type and objective. That's really vital in your programmatic investment strategy. Then you can compare delivery against those thresholds, right? And you can begin to optimize against what you've set up as your threshold tolerance in advance. Speaking of that, we've actually just released a thought leadership paper in this area called Safeguarding Your Programmatic Investment. It's a good piece, and we're going to link it in the show notes of this episode so people can download that. So those are the first two pieces of recommendation. The third is really operational excellence. It's such a key component of what separates the best from the pack in programmatic buying. And really, because data is the primary lever in programmatic, any audit you do in programmatic has to review the analytical capabilities of the team that's exercising that's executing the buys. Evidence of a test and learn approach, proof of daily optimization is key. And then you really need to emphasize the clear alignment on the setup phase. Because if those goals aren't in the right setup at the very, very beginning, you can't optimize against that. So you need to have that be part of the audit from the very beginning.
PJ, I mean, it's really, really helpful. And actually, you've done, I think, a brilliant job of trying to simplify that, because it is complicated, right? I mean, we're our own worst enemy as an industry of making things that should be fairly straightforward, just kind of complicated and feel quite oppressive. I mean, if you're a media director or a procurement leader on the brand side now, not only having to understand the technicalities of what we've just described, but you're also having to deal with questions by your boss that talks about the unknown delta, that mysterious 15% in that well-known kind of paper that suddenly just disappears into the kind of the ether. But I suppose if I'm sitting there and I'm listening to your advice, and I'm in charge of a big media budget, or even a small media budget, but with increasing money going into platforms that I don't quite know how to audit, the first thing I need to do is make a commitment to audit, right? Is make a commitment just to start. You don't have to win all of the battles. You don't have to make your media investments completely watertight and waterproof yet, but you have to start, right? That's the first thing that you have to do.
Absolutely. It's the old adage, what's the best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. You've got to start that process. You've got to get on that journey towards incremental improvement. It's a good idea to start just looking inward, looking at your own approach, do a good, robust analysis of the current approach, the ways of working.
Yeah.
Really dig into the data templates. That sounds boring, but it's a hugely important start to that journey. How are you collecting the information? Just look at the basic levels of expected transparency in that programmatic exchange. And then I think do an analysis of the inventory you're buying. Yeah. How are you buying it and why? Is it set up properly at that setup phase, as we talked about earlier? Consider, whether or not that supply is efficient for you as an organization and whether you're optimizing it all the way through the buy cycle. Yeah. And then, the quality safeguards are huge, because if you approach programmatic as a set it and forget it approach, you're going to get a quality variable misses your value proposition, and it's going to be a downgrade. The opportunity is to really monitor that carefully, hands on keyboards, to ensure that that quality variable is maintained to your expectations and that the price you're paying for it is optimized through the marketplace at that particular time. So really important to just start with those incremental steps and begin to get a program for continuous improvement.
It's good. It's really good advice. And I have a prediction for us, PJ, that in the coming months and perhaps even coming years, we will do more on this subject within MediaSnack than perhaps any other subject, because this is absolutely critical in providing clear oversight and governance to what is always going to be an increasing media spend. So
yeah, I think you're right. When you think about the spend trends, David, that's going to dictate where this all heads. And so I think you're right. We'll be talking about it more. We're going to do a webinar on it at the end of March 31st. So that's to come.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for that, PJ. Very good. So I think that's pretty much it for now. If you like what we do, give us a thumbs up. If you have a particular question that you'd like us to address, please share that. But I think for this episode, we're gonna close it there, and we will see you next time.
Bye for now.
Media Snack is brought to you each week by IDComms, the award-winning growth consultancy specializing in media. We help advertisers on a life cycle to growth in 3 service areas: operations, partnerships, and optimization that transform your media investments into real company growth. Whether you're planning an agency pitch, upgrading your media organization, want to learn new best practice, or simply get better performance from your media investments, you can find out more at idcomms.com/growth.